I was standing in my driveway, the steam from my dark roast coffee curling into the crisp morning air, wearing nothing but flannel pajama bottoms and a t-shirt, when the red and blue strobe lights of 3 sheriff's cruisers began to dance across the immaculately manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates. And as the sirens cut, leaving only the crackle of police radios, I looked across the property line to see her standing there. Meredith Vane, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, pointing a manicured finger at me like a loaded weapon, screaming that I was a criminal in my own front yard. She was absolutely convinced she had won, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass, vibrating with the sort of toxic confidence that only comes from years of unchecked suburban tyranny. But what this HOA dictator didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have realized as she adjusted her designer sunglasses and smoothed her blazer, was that back in my home office, framed on the wall behind my dual-monitor setup, were my credentials as a former patent attorney and mechanical engineer, a man who had spent the last decade dissecting ironclad corporate contracts and finding the microscopic loopholes that bring down Fortune 500 companies. My specialty isn't just engineering, it's weaponized bureaucracy, finding the exact clause, the forgotten statute, the buried regulation that can obliterate someone's entire existence with a single sheet of paper. So if you're watching this and currently living through your own HOA nightmare, drop your location in the comments right now, because Meredith Vane just made the single biggest legal miscalculation of her entire life. And I am about to take you on a journey of petty revenge that spiraled into a federal investigation. Let me take you back 6 months, back before the war began, back when I bought this N-unit townhome in Willow Creek, thinking I had finally escaped the noise of the city for a gated paradise in North Carolina, where the grass is measured with rulers and the silence is heavy and expensive. I'm Ethan Cross, 44, a guy who just wanted to rebuild his life after a divorce that felt less like a separation and more like 18 months of trench warfare, a legal battle that stripped me of my patience but gave me a masterclass in documentation that most lawyers would kill for. So when I moved here, I just wanted to smell the fresh mulch and forget about conflict. Then I met the neighbor from hell, Meredith, 52, the chairwoman of the Architectural Review Board, a woman who drove a pearl-white Mercedes like it was a tank and patrolled the neighborhood at dawn with a clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk, checking for violations before the sun had even fully risen. The catalyst for our war was my Subaru, parked in my own driveway, 18 feet of concrete that I own. But when I unloaded my groceries, my bumper hung exactly 14 inches into the public easement, a strip of land that, legally speaking, exists specifically to accommodate overflow, a fact I knew because I had read the municipal code before I even signed the mortgage. She appeared out of nowhere, the scent of expensive chemical perfume announcing her arrival before she even spoke, telling me that my vehicle violated community aesthetic standards, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that Southern nightmares use to mask their venom. And when I calmly told her that Section 14.7, the rule she was citing, didn't actually exist in our bylaws, her eyes went wide, not with fear, but with the realization that I wasn't going to roll over like everyone else. She called 911 right there, hysteria rising in her voice as she reported a disturbance, claiming I was blocking public access and refusing to comply. A performance worthy of an Oscar, and 20 minutes later, Deputy Miller arrived, looking exhausted, glancing from his tablet to my property survey, then to the easement, and finally to Meredith, telling her in no uncertain terms that no laws were being broken. That should have been the end of it, a minor skirmish in the suburbs. But as the officers were leaving, Meredith leaned in close to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that chilled my blood, saying, "This is exactly what I warned the board about when they started letting people like you into Willow Creek." And in that moment, seeing the prejudice behind her polish, I didn't feel anger. I felt the cold, mechanical click of a switch flipping in my brain, the hunter awakening, because when someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them, and you have to destroy them. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened a fresh file on my laptop and began what would become the most comprehensive dossier of my career, treating Meredith not as a neighbor, but as a hostile entity in a high-stakes patent dispute. And she made it easy, because the very next day, I received 18 pages of violations via certified mail, citing grass height, trash convisibility, and mailbox angles. all backed up by high-resolution aerial photography. She had used a drone, hovering directly over my private patio, snapping photos of my backyard sanctuary, and as I stared at the glossy prints, my legal brain lit up like a Christmas tree because operating a surveillance drone over private residential property without consent isn't just rude. It's a violation of FAA airspace regulations and North Carolina privacy statutes. I filed a counter-complaint within hours, attaching the evidence she had foolishly sent me, and by that afternoon, the city had slapped the HOA with a cease and desist order, grounding her entire spy operation. But Meredith was like a hydra. You cut off one head and two more grow back. So she escalated, calling code enforcement to report that I was running an illegal manufacturing business from my home office. Officer Davis, the code inspector, arrived looking confused, expecting to find a sweatshop, but instead found my neatly organized engineering files and my zoning compliance certificates. And after 15 minutes, he looked at me, shook his head, and wrote her a citation for filing a false report, marking the first time the system had turned back on her. The climax of this first act came 3 days later at an emergency board meeting she called to publicly humiliate me, armed with a PowerPoint presentation and a petition signed by concerned neighbors. But as she railed against my moral character, I sat there silently, holding a single manila folder, waiting for my turn to speak. When I finally stood up, I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I simply presented the original 2018 developer covenants, handing copies to the board members, pointing out that the rules she was trying to enforce were added in 2021, 3 years after my driveway was poured, making my property legally grandfathered in under Section 12.3, a fact confirmed by Tom, the original surveyor who I had brought with me as a surprise witness. The room went silent, the kind of silence where you can hear a pin drop, as the board president, Mr. Chong, asked Meredith if she had verified the dates before fining me, and watching her stammer, watching that veneer of invincibility crack as the board voted 4-1 to dismiss all charges and formally censure her for harassment, was pure, unadulterated dopamine. I thought I had won. I thought the logic and the law had prevailed. But as I walked out into the cool night air, hearing the whispers of support from neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up until now, I saw her through the window, pacing, making phone calls, her face twisted not in defeat, but in calculation, and I realized that for Meredith Vane, this wasn't about rules, it was about power, and I had just humiliated a narcissist in her own kingdom. The war wasn't over, it was just moving underground, and I had no idea that while I was playing checkers with bylaws, she was playing a much darker game, one involving federal crimes and a conspiracy that went far beyond the property lines of Willow Creek Estates. If the board meeting was the opening skirmish, what followed was psychological trench warfare, designed to break my sanity bit by bit, starting at exactly 6:30 a.m. every single morning with the sound of stiletto heels clicking on the pavement like a metronome of doom, followed by the roar of a leaf blower positioned directly outside my office window. Meredith had somehow obtained my work schedule, timing her landscaping assault to coincide perfectly with my client's Zoom calls. 90 minutes of gas-powered shrieking that forced me to mute myself and apologize to Fortune 500 executives, destroying my professional credibility while she stood there, checking her watch, ensuring maximum disruption. Then came the financial bleed, a blizzard of citations for infractions so microscopic they required an electron microscope to see. A garden hose left out for 12 minutes past the regulation window, a newspaper retrieved 37 seconds before the authorized time. Each ticket escalating in price, $50, $75, $100, accumulating to over $1,000 in a single month, all printed on official Willow Creek letterhead. But here is where my background in patent fraud detection started screaming alarms in my head, because the font on these citations was slightly off, the spacing inconsistent with the official documents I had on file, and she was signing them herself, bypassing the management company entirely, effectively committing document fraud to extort money from me. The physical aggression escalated when I found decorative river rocks placed 18 inches over my property line, a subtle annexation of my land, and when I moved them back, Meredith called 911 again, claiming theft of landscaping materials, forcing Deputy Miller to return. looking like a man questioning his life choices as he explained to a grown woman that you cannot trespass on someone else's property and then claim they are stealing your rocks. But the tide began to turn when the community started to wake up, realizing that the monster wasn't invincible, and neighbors like Dr. Eris and Mrs. Higgins started coming to me, sharing their own horror stories, showing me Ring doorbell footage of Meredith measuring fences at dawn and peering into windows. The breakthrough, the moment the ground shifted beneath our feet, came from Mrs. Higgins, the sweet 73-year-old widow 3 doors down, who knocked on my door one rainy afternoon, clutching a casserole and a secret, telling me that her grandson, who worked in the county clerk's office, had noticed some irregularities with the HOA's tax filings, specifically regarding federal liens and mysterious inquiries from the IRS. Federal inquiries. Those 2 words hit me like a lightning bolt, shifting my perspective from annoying neighbor dispute to criminal investigation. Because you don't get IRS flags for arguing about grass height. You get them for money, lots of it, moving in ways it shouldn't. I spent the next 4 nights fueled by espresso and spite, diving into the public records, pulling the last 3 years of financial statements for Willow Creek Estates, paying the county clerk $15 for documents that would turn out to be the smoking gun, and what I found made my blood run cold. There was a landscaping contractor, Vane Global Solutions, receiving $52,000 a year for maintenance. Yet there were no competitive bids, no detailed invoices, just round numbers paid out like clockwork. And when I ran a corporate background check on this company, I found it wasn't a landscaping firm at all, but a shell company registered in Phoenix, Arizona, to a man named Julian Vane, Meredith's brother. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a deafening click. Meredith wasn't just a power-tripping Karen. She was a racketeer, creating fake emergencies and harassment campaigns to distract the neighborhood while she funneled our dues into her brother's shell company, laundering nearly $43,000 over 24 months, effectively stealing from every single family in the cul-de-sac to fund her luxury car and designer wardrobe. I needed the nail in the coffin, the undeniable proof, so I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the municipal email correspondence between the HOA and outside contractors, a long shot that paid off in gold when I received 73 pages of emails that read like a screenplay for a bad mob movie. Sister, that engineer neighbor is sniffing around. Julian had written in an email subject line Phase 3 extraction. Maybe it's time to wrap up the operation, to which Meredith had replied. One final score first. We'll fabricate a sinkhole emergency at the Thursday meeting. I need an invoice for $18,000 immediately. Then we disappear. They were planning one last heist, a smash and grab on the Community Reserve Fund before fleeing the state. But the email that truly terrified me, the one that escalated this to a life-or-death situation, was Julian's final sign-off. If he gets too close, remember we discussed permanent solutions to persistent problems. They weren't just thieves. They were conspiring to commit violence against a federal witness, crossing the line into RICO territory, organized crime, and instant felony status. I didn't call the police. I called my contact at the FBI field office in Charlotte, Special Agent Reynolds, a woman I had worked with on intellectual property theft cases in my past life, and when she saw the email chain, the wire transfers across state lines, and the threat of violence, her demeanor shifted from professional interest to predatory focus. This is wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, Ethan, she told me, her voice steady. And if they are planning to execute this $18,000 theft on Thursday night, we aren't just going to investigate them. We are going to catch them in the act. The plan was set. I would let Meredith think she was winning, let her walk into that board meeting believing she was about to cash out and run, while Agent Reynolds coordinated a synchronized takedown that would happen simultaneously in North Carolina and Arizona, trapping the siblings in a web of their own making. Wednesday night, my house felt like a command center, monitors glowing with spreadsheets calculating the exact restitution each neighbor was owed, the printer churning out evidence packages, the air thick with the static electricity of approaching justice. But Meredith wasn't going down quietly. She must have sensed the walls closing in because she spent the night spiraling, frantically burning documents in her backyard fire pit, violating a county burn ban, screaming at the firefighters who arrived to put it out, adding obstruction of justice to her growing resume. But the real darkness came at 3 a.m. when my security cameras picked up a figure in a dark hoodie spray painting "Fed Snitch" across my garage door in dripping red letters. She knew. Somehow she knew I was the danger. But she had no idea that her vandalism, her threats, her desperate attempts to intimidate me were only adding years to her prison sentence, cementing her fate as federal agents watched from unmarked cars, waiting for the sun to rise on Judgment Day. Thursday dawned with a heavy, ominous gray sky, the atmosphere in Willow Creek charged with a tension that vibrated in your teeth, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath waiting for the lightning strike. Meredith spent the morning in a manic frenzy, and my security system caught her attempting to pick the lock on my back door at 2:47 p.m., a clumsy, desperate attempt to find the evidence I had collected, but the smart lock held, and the footage of her breaking and entering just became another nail in a coffin that was already sealed shut. By evening, the community center was packed, 67 residents squeezed into folding chairs, buzzing with rumors, alerted by the subtle campaign I had waged with Dr. Eris and Mrs. Higgins to ensure everyone witnessed the finale. Meredith swept into the room at 7:15 p.m. wearing a new designer suit purchased with our stolen money, clutching her leather portfolio, looking every inch the imperious leader, completely unaware that the unmarked vans in the parking lot contained federal agents checking their weapons. She took the podium, launching into her emergency presentation, projecting blurry photos of a massive sinkhole that she claimed threatened the very foundation of our neighborhood, demanding an immediate emergency authorization of $18,000 to be wired to Vane Global Solutions for geological stabilization. It was a performance of sociopathic confidence, lying to the faces of the people she had lived beside for years. But as she pressed for the vote, a hand went up. It was Mrs. Higgins, looking frail but steel-eyed, asking, "Meredith, dear, why do the metadata tags on these sinkhole photos say they were taken in Arizona yesterday?" The room went deathly silent. The air sucked out of the space, and Meredith's face crumbled, the mask slipping to reveal the terrified animal underneath, stammering about certified assessments. But it was too late. The double doors at the back of the hall burst open, and Special Agent Reynolds strode in, flanked by 4 agents in tactical vests, her voice cutting through the room like a gavel. "Meredith Vane, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, and embezzlement." The chaos was instantaneous, flashbulbs popping, neighbors gasping, the metallic snick-snick of handcuffs locking around the wrists of the woman who had terrorized us for years, and at that exact moment, Reynolds received the confirmation through her earpiece that Julian had been tackled by FBI agents at the Phoenix airport, trying to board a flight to Mexico with $47,000 in cash stuffed into his carry-on. As they marched her out, past the stunned faces of her victims, Meredith locked eyes with me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, and screamed, "You ruined my life. You don't belong here." I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and delivered the line I had been holding in for 6 months. "Actually, Meredith, federal criminals who steal from their neighbors are the ones who don't belong here." And the room erupted, a tidal wave of applause and relief washing over the scene as she was shoved into the back of a federal SUV. The aftermath was a cleanup operation of epic proportions. Meredith pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence, taking 22 years in federal prison, while Julian got 15, and the asset forfeiture team seized everything: the cars, the house, the hidden accounts, returning 98 cents on the dollar to the families of Willow Creek. We turned the empty lot where Meredith's house of horrors once stood into a community garden, a place of peace where the only thing being measured is the height of the sunflowers, and in a twist that Hollywood would reject as too cheesy, I ended up dating Jessica Chun, the reporter who covered the story, bonding over our shared love of justice and perfectly filed paperwork. But as I sit here now, drinking coffee in my driveway, watching the kids play without fear of being fined, I have to ask, was it worth the 6 months of hell, the threats, the paranoia? Absolutely. Because sometimes you don't fight for yourself, you fight to show the bullies of the world that eventually they will pick on the wrong person, the person who reads the fine print, the person who doesn't blink. But it leaves me wondering, how many Merediths are out there right now, ruling their little suburban kingdoms with fear, unchecked because nobody has the time or the courage to look at the books. Are you safe in your own home, or are you just funding someone else's getaway car? Check your HOA statements, people, and if you see something, say something, because the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good neighbors to do nothing. I'm Ethan Cross, and this was the liberation of Willow Creek. Subscribe for more justice.